Do you suffer from painful bloating immediately after you've eaten? Does it feel like you get bloated no matter what you eat, and even sometimes water makes you bloated? Is that bloating feeling really messing with your confidence? And finally, do probiotics make it worse? If that sounds like you, this video will help. In this video, we're going to break down the #1 cause of bloating in 99% of people and how to fix it. Exactly which strange food you're eating every single day that's likely causing your bloating. Hint, they're healthy foods. Don't forget to stay to the end because we're going to show you how to fix this problem forever so you can eat whatever you want without looking 9 months pregnant. The first thing to note is that the food is not the root cause of the problem. You are. If you could eat that food previously, but now you can't eat it, something has changed in your body. And we're going to talk about that because that root cause is something we call dysbiosis. Now, dysbiosis is an imbalance between the positive and the opportunistic bacteria that live inside your gut. Now, the reason we say opportunistic and not bad bacteria is because most of the bacteria inside your system is actually pretty useful. The problem, however, is when the opportunistic stuff, or the criminals I like to call them, they start to overrun. And if you don't have enough police bacteria to control the criminal bacteria, then you start to run into problems. So this dysbiosis or imbalance in your gut bacteria is often caused by damage to the beneficial bacteria, and that allows the opportunistic bacteria to overgrow. For example, alcohol, stress, drugs, ultra-processed foods, poor sleep, high stress. These can all contribute to that dysbiosis and creating that imbalance in your gut bacteria. That means that when you eat certain foods, you get an over-fermentation. For example, it produces things like hydrogen and methane. Methane is that smelly gas that you get when you pass wind, and the hydrogen will be the reason you bloat. So normally what happens if you don't have the right amounts of bacteria inside your bowel, then you get that over-fermentation and you get that smelly gas, and that's because you have that dysbiosis of that gut bacteria and you have too much of the opportunistic stuff. And when you have too much of the opportunistic bacteria, it can create digestive problems, slow food transit, over fermentation, and that causes bloating. Now, in a minute, we're going to talk about some of the things that you can do to help overcome that problem. But second, let's have a little look at some of the other problems that can cause your bloating. Before we talk more about the bloating, we need to specify specifically where you're being bloated because that will depend on your root cause problem. Now, most people's bloating occurs around the belly button region. That's called your bowel or your large intestine. And that's because of that over-fermentation of certain fruits and vegetable fiber that we spoke about earlier. But if you have bloating a little higher up, somewhere between your chest and your belly button, that could be what we call a SIBO or a SIFO. Now, SIBO stands for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and SIFO stands for small intestinal fungal overgrowth. And both of those can occur when you have reduced stomach acid. For example, if you're on drugs like omeprazole or you have a really stressful period, that will also reduce your acid production. And when you do that, that's your first line of defense against the outside world, which means that bacteria can come in and they can thrive inside that small intestine because they are not being killed by sufficient stomach acid production. Another reason that you could have too much bacteria inside your small intestine that's causing your bloating is because you have insufficient bile flow from your gallbladder. So bile is a substance produced by your liver and stored inside your gallbladder. And when you eat a large fatty meal, it squirts out bile from your gallbladder into your small intestine to help you digest fats. Now, if you have poor bile flow, it will not clear out some of the bacteria that should be in there. So that could be your root cause problem and it's causing your bloating after you eat. If, however, your problem occurs solely in the bowel, which is the belly button region, then there are a certain number of foods that we know can cause this problem if your digestion is not optimal. The first one is dairy. Now, most people mistakenly think that it's the lactose in the dairy that's causing the problem. Actually, it's the protein in the dairy that is causing a lot of issues. The whey protein, the casein protein. Now, these are pretty complex proteins that you can struggle to break down because milk is not the substance we used to drink that our ancestors used to consume. For example, they would consume raw milk, and raw milk contains bacteria and enzymes to help you break down some of those foods. Or they would have had those products fermented, and that fermentation process goes towards breaking down some of those heavy proteins before we start to eat them, like a yogurt or a quark or a sour cream. So if you're finding that you're eating a lot of dairy, then it's probably the proteins in the dairy that are causing your issues, and I would definitely stay away from any whey protein products, which will be the protein bars or the protein shakes. Another food that can cause problems is gluten. So gluten is a family of proteins found in grains such as wheat, and they can be very tricky for people to digest. Now, the biggest mistake people make with gluten is thinking they have celiac disease. So celiac is a gene, and when that gene is turned on, people get very inflammatory responses when they eat gluten. In my experience, most people don't have celiac disease, but what they do have is what we call non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Now, non-celiac gluten sensitivity is where you get an inflammatory response when you eat the gluten, but it's nowhere near as bad as a celiac. For example, someone who's celiac disease and accidentally eats gluten may have some pretty severe reactions, vomiting, hives. It's pretty bad stuff. I've seen that quite a few times. Whereas when you have someone who has non-celiac gluten sensitivity, they get inflammation, which might be bloating and redness and soreness, but the inflammation is not anywhere near the same as it is when you have someone who is celiac. If you're struggling with gluten and gluten-containing grains, then I would probably remove them immediately from your diet to buy you time to figure out why you have that problem. And that problem is most likely caused by dysbiosis, in which you don't have the right gut bacteria to break down your food. And we also know that having dysbiosis can contribute to flipping on that celiac gene. Another set of foods that can cause bloating in a lot of people are high starch foods. For example, chickpeas, kidney beans and lentils are all high starch foods that can cause bloating in some people when they struggle to break them down properly. Now remember, the fiber in vegetables is not broken down properly by your human cells. That is the job of the bacteria inside the large intestine. And if you don't have the right bacteria because you have that underlying dysbiosis, then those foods can definitely cause some bloating problems for you. Quickly, I wanted to touch on meat. Meat is very rarely a cause of bloating in a lot of people. And that's because most of the breakdown of meat occurs with your human cells. For example, your pancreas will produce protease, and there's actually enzymes inside your stomach that will also help the breakdown of meat. So proteases and lipases, these are enzymes that digest proteins and fats. That digestion occurs inside the small intestine when you eat meat. The meat doesn't really make it into that large intestine to then ferment, because that's the job of the vegetable fiber from the fruits and other vegetables that you eat. I think this is why a lot of people can find that going on a carnivore diet or a ketogenic diet temporarily can help with their bloating. It's not that that diet is helping with the bloating, it's just that you remove the fiber from your diet and therefore the bacteria don't have anything to ferment, and therefore you don't get bloated. But that's a temporary fix to a bigger underlying problem of dysbiosis. So how do we fix this problem? How do we fix this underlying dysbiosis? Well, the easiest way to fix this underlying problem is to build up or regrow some of the beneficial bacteria that we're missing inside our system. Now, most people go straight towards probiotics when trying to rebuild gut bacteria, but I think that's a mistake. In the clients I work with, we find that prebiotics are a much better way to start than probiotics. Now, prebiotics are the food or the fuel for the bacteria that live inside your system, whereas the probiotics are beneficial bacteria inside a capsule that you can add to your system. Here's the difference. When you add a probiotic strain in, it has to work with all of the other strains of bacteria inside your system. That may or may not work, and you get different effects from different probiotics, assuming the probiotic is alive inside your system after you've swallowed it, which is a completely separate problem. However, when you take prebiotics, prebiotics generally are fiber that are from fruits and different veggies, they will feed the bacteria in your system already. So if you have a certain amount of bacteria and you feed them with prebiotics, then they'll grow even more, which is a much better way that I find to start. The product I like is something called Reseed R1, and this is something I made to grow what we call the 5 keystone bacteria inside your system to help improve the diversity of your microbiome. Now, the diversity of your microbiome is very important. There is still so much we don't know about the microbiome, but we know that having a wide range of different types of bacteria inside your system is really beneficial for health and will definitely help you improve your digestion. One more thing about probiotics is that you must match the probiotic strain with the particular problem. For example, there are specific probiotics that are useful for diarrhea, and then there are specific probiotics that are useful to help you digest gluten. And so you then have to match the right probiotic with the right problem, and then you have to take it long enough to allow it to survive, and then you have to feed it with the right prebiotics to make sure it stays there. And this is why, as you can see, I prefer to start with prebiotics instead of probiotics. So adding in the right prebiotics and the right probiotics will help you fix that underlying dysbiosis, which is the root cause of the reason you bloat. Hopefully this video was helpful. If you like this, please click like and follow along, and make sure you don't miss out on any future videos.